Picture this. It's a dinner reservation for 7 o'clock. Everyone else rolls in at 5 past, maybe 10 past, a little breathless, a little apologetic. Sorry, traffic was insane. But you've been sitting at that table since 6:42. You've already read the menu twice. You know what you're ordering. You've picked your seat, positioned yourself with a clear view of the door, and you're now watching the other diners with the calm, patient energy of someone who has simply always lived slightly ahead of everyone else. People call you punctual. Some call you type A. A few, the ones who are chronically late, call you quietly intimidating. But here's what nobody has ever really stopped to ask. Why? Why does arriving early feel not just comfortable, but necessary? Why does the thought of cutting it close send a low-level alarm through your entire nervous system? And what is actually going on inside the brain of a person who would rather sit alone in a parking lot for 12 minutes than walk in exactly on time? That's what we're digging into today. And I promise you, it goes so much deeper than just being organized. Let's start with the obvious assumption, because we need to knock it down first. Most people here always arrives early, and they think, control freak, anxious overachiever, someone who color-codes their calendar and irons their socks. And sure, sometimes that's part of the picture. But the psychology of early arrival is far richer, far more nuanced, and honestly, far more fascinating than that surface-level read. Because the same behavior, showing up early, can come from completely different psychological places. And understanding which one is yours, that's where things get interesting. Let's talk about the brain first, because your brain is doing something very specific when it decides that being on time isn't enough. There's a concept in psychology called anticipatory anxiety. And it's not the dramatic kind of anxiety where your heart races and your palms sweat. It's quieter than that. It's the low hum of, what if something goes wrong, that runs in the background of certain minds almost constantly. For people wired this way, arriving early isn't about the destination. It's about eliminating the unknown. Every extra minute of buffer time is a variable removed from the equation. The traffic that might happen, the parking that might not exist, the elevator that might be slow. Your brain runs these scenarios not because it's broken, but because it's doing exactly what brains evolved to do, scanning for threats, solving problems before they arrive. Early arrival is, in this sense, a form of preemptive problem solving, and your brain rewards you for it with a little hit of calm, a release of tension, the quiet satisfaction of a system that worked. And here's where it gets really interesting from a neuroscience perspective. Research into the anterior insula, a region of the brain deeply involved in how we process time, uncertainty, and emotional discomfort, shows that some people have a higher sensitivity to what neuroscientists call temporal uncertainty. In plain language, the not knowing exactly when things will happen is genuinely more uncomfortable for some brains than others. It's not a choice. It's not a quirk. It's wiring. And for those people, being early is the brain's most elegant solution to a problem that most people don't even register as a problem. But let's talk about something even deeper, because anxiety isn't the only engine running here. For a lot of early arrivers, maybe for you, there's something else underneath it. Something that has less to do with fear and more to do with respect, with values, with the way you were taught, explicitly or implicitly, to show up in the world. Think about where you learned punctuality. For many people, it traces back to a parent, a grandparent, a coach, a teacher, someone whose relationship with time made an impression early. Maybe it was a father who said, "If you're not early, you're late," with a certainty that felt like scripture. Maybe it was a mother who treated tardiness as a form of disrespect, to the host, to the occasion, to the other people whose time mattered. These early lessons embed themselves not just as habits, but as values. And when a value is deeply held, violating it doesn't just feel inconvenient, it feels wrong. It produces something close to shame. So arriving early isn't just comfortable, it's ethical. It's who you are. Psychologists who study conscientiousness, one of the big 5 personality traits, consistently find that people who score high in this dimension have a fundamentally different relationship with time than people who score lower. High conscientiousness is linked to self-discipline, reliability, and what researchers call future orientation, the ability to keep the future version of yourself and your future commitments as vivid and real as the present moment. When you're sitting in that parking lot at 6:42, you're not just waiting. You're honoring a version of yourself that made a commitment. You're keeping a promise to a future moment. That's not anxiety. That's integrity made visible. Now, let me introduce you to something called the planning fallacy, a cognitive bias first described by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky back in the 1970s. The planning fallacy describes the universal human tendency to underestimate how long tasks will take, how many obstacles will arise, and how much time a journey will consume. Most people fall directly into this trap every single time, almost without exception. But early arrivers? They've built a natural defense against it. Somewhere along the way, consciously or not, they learned to inflate their estimates, to add buffer, to plan for the planning fallacy before it happens. And the result is a life in which they almost never scramble, almost never run, almost never walk into a room breathless and apologetic. It looks effortless from the outside. It's actually a finely tuned cognitive strategy. But here's the thing nobody talks about in the conversation around early arrival: the cost. Because there is one. And I say this with full empathy, because some of you know exactly what I mean. The cost of always being early is that you spend a lot of your life waiting. A lot of your life in the margins, in the lobby, in the car, in the cafe with your coffee going cold. And sometimes, in those in-between spaces, a quiet frustration can build. A frustration toward the people who don't operate this way. The friends who are always 15 minutes behind. The colleagues who treat deadlines as suggestions. The partners who seem genuinely unbothered by running late. To the early arriver, this can feel like a values mismatch so deep it becomes almost personal. Like they're telling you your time doesn't matter. Like the agreement, the social contract of showing up when you said you would, means nothing to them. And sometimes that frustration is valid. But let me offer you a reframe, because psychology has something useful to say here too. Research on what's called temporal personality types, the idea that people genuinely experience and relate to time in fundamentally different ways, suggests that for some people, time is a fixed, finite, almost sacred resource. Every minute has weight. Every minute wasted is a minute gone. But for others, time is fluid, contextual, and relational. For them, being a little late isn't disrespect. It's just the natural result of living in the moment rather than in the clock. Neither of these is objectively correct. They're different operating systems. And the early arriver's work, if they're willing to do it, is not to become less punctual. It's to develop a kind of compassion for the people running a different internal clock, without abandoning the values that make them who they are. There's also a control angle here that deserves honesty, just like we always try to bring honest psychology to this channel. For some early arrivers, the behavior is less about respect and more about managing an environment before anyone else arrives to complicate it. Coming early means you choose your seat. You set the tone. You have a moment to orient before the chaos begins. For people who find social situations even mildly overwhelming, and many early arrivers do, this is a survival strategy dressed up as punctuality. It's not about the clock at all. It's about reducing social uncertainty, about having a few minutes to breathe before the performance begins. And there is nothing wrong with that. But knowing that it's there, knowing what the early arrival is actually doing for you, gives you power. Awareness always does. Let me tell you about something that happened in a study out of San Diego State University that I found genuinely fascinating. Researchers looking at chronotype, your natural biological tendency toward being a morning or evening person, found that morning-oriented individuals consistently displayed higher levels of proactive behavior, including early arrival to scheduled events. But more interestingly, they also reported higher subjective feelings of being in control of their lives. Not because their lives were objectively more controlled, but because their behavior was in alignment with their internal sense of time. They weren't fighting their own biology. They were flowing with it. And there is a special kind of peace that comes from living in sync with who you actually are. So, who are you, really, when you show up early? You are someone for whom time is not an abstract concept, but a living, breathing commitment. You are someone whose brain has learned, through wiring, through upbringing, through experience, that the space before the moment is where safety lives, where dignity lives, where your best self has room to breathe. You are not controlling. You are not rigid. You are not anxious, at least not only anxious. You are someone who takes seriously the idea that showing up matters, that presence matters, that the people you're meeting and the moments you're walking into deserve your preparation and your respect. And maybe the world needs a little more of that. In a culture that glorifies being busy, being overbooked, arriving flustered as proof of a full life, maybe the person sitting quietly in the lobby at 6:42 with a calm expression and already knowing their order is not the uptight one. Maybe they're the one who figured something out. So here's where I want to leave you today. If you're an early arriver, I hope this felt like someone finally took your relationship with time seriously, because it deserves to be taken seriously. Your punctuality is not a compulsion, it's a value. It's a way of loving the people you're going to meet and the moments you're about to be part of. And that is something worth being proud of. Drop a comment below. Are you always early, always late, or always exactly on time? And tell me, is it a choice, or does it just feel like who you are? I'd genuinely love to know. And if today's video landed somewhere real for you, hit subscribe, because we're going deep into human behavior every single week here at the Psych Spot. And we're just getting started.